Did you know there are 100,000 typefaces for you to choose from? That's quite a lot, isn't it? I'm Setna, brand boss. Today, I'm going to be talking about typefaces because I had a conversation with a client the other day about the typefaces that she was thinking of using and why they were wrong for her brand. So without any further ado, I'm actually going to share my screen today. Normally it's just me and my mug talking to the camera, but I thought the best way to actually do this was to show you some slides and explain the different kinds of typefaces. Because did you know there are 100,000 typefaces for you to choose from? That's quite a lot, isn't it? It can be quite daunting to choose the right typeface for your brand. And different typefaces will give your brand a different feel, really. So I'm just going to go through what brands they might work for, what kind of businesses they might work for, and hopefully that'll help you if you're trying to choose your own fonts. So let's just get going. Different types of typefaces. The first one that I'm going to show you here is the serif typeface. Now, you've heard of serif and sans serif. What do they mean? Serif typefaces have the little feet, as you can see here, at the end of the letters. Now, serif typefaces are the most traditional of typefaces. If you think about like Roman architecture and ancient Greek architecture, that all the lettering that you'd get on like the Parthenon or, all of that has got those little feet on the end. And that was actually because when they used to carve the letters out of the stone, they didn't need a chisel, and they put like a chisel edge at the bottom, and that before they do like the tall bit of a T, for example, you put this little edge on to stop it cracking further down the rock. So that's where serifs came from. And they were really popular all the way through till about the 1900s, where people started to design sans serif and more decorative fonts. These do tend to be linked with more traditional businesses, very professional services. So you'll have a lot of doctors, lawyers, solicitors, maybe even accountants will traditionally have used serif typefaces. I keep saying traditionally because quite often now they're moving towards the sans serif space, and we'll talk about those in a minute. The other areas of businesses that may want to use a serif typeface are those that are linked with tradition. So things like wedding companies, for example, quite often use serif typefaces. They can look quite high end. A serif typeface can look quite old fashioned if you choose the wrong one, but it can look quite high end if you choose the right one, and very elegant. So certainly when I did Lorna Reeves to my wedding, we went with a serif font. If you think about other brands, maybe like Jo Malone or Liberty of London, they have got serif fonts as well, and they are quite high end. Now, if you go quite slim on your fonts, you can make it look more elegant. So there's a whole thing around whether you go capitals or all caps, and that's a whole other talk. But if you have a serif font in all caps, it can look quite shouty. If you then take it down to a light typeface, it will look more elegant than it will shouty. So serif typefaces can be traditional, can be old-fashioned, depending on the typeface, do look professional. They do look very learned as well, because it tends to be the type of typeface that you might find in a dictionary or kind of an old school book. The contrast to serif typefaces is sans serif typefaces. Now, sans serif typefaces don't have the little feet at the ends of the letters. Sans is obviously French for without. So those would be quite a lot cleaner. They're a lot more modern. They tend to be used by more modern, forward-facing companies. They're used by a lot of tech companies because, if you think about even social media platforms like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, they all use sans serif. And part of the reason for that is that when they shrink down to a phone size, you can actually read them a lot easier. They're a lot easier to render. You can use serif typefaces and sans serif typefaces together on your website, but I wouldn't recommend using serif typefaces for copy because it goes quite small. So you could use them for a heading, for example, if you had a wedding company or something where your logo was in a serif typeface, you can reflect that in the heading font and then use a sans serif for the body copy, because it's a lot simpler and it's a lot easier to read at small sizes. Serif typefaces are used by a lot of tech companies because they imply simplicity, clarity, ease of use. And so if you've got a brand that you want to do that as well, and that's why some of the lawyers and solicitors and accountants are now moving towards sans serif, because they want to look more user-friendly, they want to look easier to understand, and not that they're not like trying to be too authoritative. The serif typeface can be more authoritative, and if you want to position yourself in that way, a serif typeface is a great way to do it. But if you want to be more on a level with your audience, then a sans serif typeface is going to convey that a little bit more. It's a bit more friendly, it's a bit more open, and as I say, it's a little bit easier to understand. Those are the two main types of typefaces. You can use these for your logos, and certainly, again, a lot of tech brands will use sans serif typefaces for their logos. Think of Xero, think of most tech companies will use sans serif because they want to look user-friendly. So you can use serif and sans serif, but there are some other typefaces I'm going to take you through. These are the two that I would use for copy. So the serif typeface for a heading, and then the sans serif can be used for heading or copy. The other ones slightly less so, and I'll just go through those now. So script typefaces. Now I see script typefaces used quite often when you have a brand that's trying to look luxurious or slightly posh. You might have a script typeface. Certainly, again, wedding brands, brands that are targeted at female-driven businesses tend to use script typefaces. I've seen them written on the side of vans before, like White Van Man might use them to try to look high end, but they make the cardinal mistake of using them in caps. Never ever use them in caps, because you can see here, you can barely read it. If you've got a script typeface, it's fine for small headings and logos potentially, but don't really use it in main text, and never use it in body copy because it's so difficult to read. This script typeface is okay, and you could use it for short words, but I wouldn't really go for anything too long, because you're going to reduce legibility, and legibility I think is really important if you're trying to convey your value and what it is that you do in a matter of seconds when people are scrolling. Think how fast people scroll. 96 meters a day is a lot of scrolling. That's the height of Big Ben. So you need something that's going to be really easy to read in a flash. Hence the serif and sans serif typefaces are the best for brand communications. You can use these for decorative effect and potentially for a logo, as long as you can read it. Legibility is everything. The decorative typefaces, now these are ones where you can have a bit of fun. Certainly if you've got a themed kind of business, whether that's a restaurant or something that is stuck or about a particular era. For example, I did work with a restaurant chain that was based around the 1930s in Art Deco. So we used a deco typeface, but not for everything, just for the headings on the menus, just for the logo itself. And then obviously all the copy was again sans serif, because it was a nice contrast actually. So decorative typefaces can be used for logos, they can be used for short headings, they can come from any era. It's not just the 1920s and 30s. You can have a 1970s typeface or a 1960s typeface or a Star Wars typeface or a Lego typeface. They generally kind of speak of an era or even a product. A lot of brands may have a typeface made for them. So like Star Wars or like Lego, they have their own typeface. So these would fall into the decorative typeface arena as well. And they're very evocative of a certain thing or era or kind of a genre. You might use these for your company. You might use them as one-offs. Say if you were having an event and it was themed, you might want to use those as well. But they have a limited, kind of usage unless you are in that themed kind of business, like my client who had a 1930s chain of restaurants, for example. Next one, handwritten typefaces. Now these have been really, really popular over certainly the last few years, and they do add a human touch. They can look quite feminine, so again they tend to be used for either female owned or female targeted businesses. They do add that human touch though, so I've seen it creeping into identities of actually quite a few male coaches, specifically ones who are particularly also targeting females or do work with a lot of females. These do add the human touch, so it's quite a nice way of saying, hey, I'm a real person. I would say 2 words of caution. Make sure that it is legible. Again, this is actually quite a nice handwritten typeface, and you can read it quite easily. Some of them are better than others, and do make sure before you choose it that you type out your business name and make sure that it doesn't look like anything kind of rude, or it doesn't look illegible and look like another letter. So again, legibility is very important. The other thing that I would caution you with handwritten typefaces is because they have been quite trendy over the last 5 or 10 years even, that trends come and go. So I tend to use these maybe as a decorative second font rather than the main core font. But, you know, again, use in moderation, don't go mad. It might work for your logo if your, if your brand suits that kind of type. But again, you probably contrast it with some serif for the more legible parts, for example, that, you know, your copy and maybe even your strap line, something like that. So you contrast, you wouldn't do your strap line in something like this, because when it gets really small down to the size of your phone, it's going to become really quite illegible. So just be wary of legibility and be wary of the fact that it is quite trendy. And so what comes in can go out. When you're thinking about typefaces for your brand, what you want to be doing is maybe thinking 3 to 5 years longevity in order to build that recognizability and that know, like and trust elements so that people can actually recognize you when you show up online. So just think about that. Is this typeface going to be right for you in 3 to 5 years time? Brush typefaces are very similar. They're a bit more stylistic, less handwritten looking, and they look like been drawn by a brush, hence brush typefaces. Again, I'd use sparingly and make sure that you can actually read the words. A lot of the same rules apply. I have used here, just so you can see, what I consider to be a bad brush typeface, because it's actually really quite difficult to read. So, you know, that's something that I would say is a bad choice. Whereas the one above, I would say, is a pretty good choice because it's very easy to read. So just something to bear in mind when you are choosing your typefaces. Do write out your business name and make sure that it is very legible and you can't mistake it for anything else. Just before I end this live, I'm going to go through the various different typefaces and show you what difference it makes to a logo. So this is the Gucci logo. As you can see, it is a very well-known logo, which is why I'm using it. And using it's given us very high end, it's very elegant, it's very classic. It's also, you know, kind of a bit Italian. So going back to the Roman carvings and things like that. So it's a little bit entrenched in tradition and history and Italian heritage, but also having that high-end look. The fact that it's not too bulky as a logo does make it look more elegant as well. If you can imagine that in a really fat font, it wouldn't look anywhere near as cool and elegant. However, if we put it in a different typeface, like a sans serif here, we've just put it in the sans serif, as you can see, it simplifies it and it modernizes it, but does it make it look more high-end? No, it doesn't. In my opinion, it could be seen as taking the brand more modern, but I think it loses something of its heritage. And actually, Gucci is a brand with some heritage as well. So I would not personally choose that for this brand, but it does open it up and it does make it look more accessible. So if that's important to your brand, that's a consideration too. Here it is in a script font. Now, actually, it kind of works. I could, you know, if Gucci was starting all that over again and they were wanting to say, oh, we want to have a high-end logo, you know, that kind of works as well, the script font. However, it does make it more girly, more feminine. So Gucci being a unisex logo probably still works better in the classic font at the top rather than the script font below. But, you know, this one does look more decorative. It feels more floral almost. So maybe if Gucci were a perfume brand or just a perfume brand and launching, that might work quite nicely as well. This is a nice legible font, so it does kind of work. It's not a bad one, but I still prefer the first one. Now, this would be Gucci if it launched in the 1920s, for example. Very of an era. This is one of your decorative fonts that I talked about. It's very much timestamps it of an era and leaves it there. So it'd be great if Gucci was celebrating having launched in the 1920s and we're having like a flapper party, for example, they might use it for an invitation just for like novelty. But for a classic brand, again, you don't want to go too decorative, too gimmicky, too novel, because it's not going to stand the test of time. It will date very quickly and it looks a little bit gimmicky. Here is a handwritten font. And as you can see, with Gucci at the top and then Gucci at the bottom here, very different feel. It does make it look quite cheap, I would say, in this instance. A handwritten font can work well for a brand, and it can make it look very accessible, but Gucci is not a brand that really trades on its accessibility. So, you know, I wouldn't use this for a high-end brand at all. It can be used for brands that are trying to seem very accessible. It can be used for more child-centric brands as well. And this sort of handwritten font, it's very easy to read by the business owner, so it does feel kind of very human as well, but not right for Gucci. Here you go with a brush script, a bit better than the one that I'd chosen on the previous slide, just to show a difference. You can have a legible, it's very legible, but it does make the Gucci brand look a little bit too casual, really, a little bit off the cuff. This has been written in a bit of a, kind of written quite quickly and written by hand. It doesn't look very considered, it doesn't look very elegant, and it doesn't look high end. So as you can see, the very different treatments of the fonts here give a very different feel to the brand. One last word of warning is the old Comic Sans. Now you've got that on your Microsoft Office, Comic Sans, and as you can see here, it just makes everything look, and it does not work at all. I would say do not use Comic Sans for anything in your business communications whatsoever, because it will cheapen your communications. Absolutely. It was a font that was written, that was designed to actually help dyslexic children. So it's very good for children, and it does get used in children's books. It's a very easy to read font, but that's where it ends. Do not use it, and do not actually use any Microsoft Office fonts for your corporate identity. As a general rule, I mean, this can be broken by designers if they know what they're doing. But as a general rule, a Microsoft Office font is pretty ubiquitous. Everybody's got it on their system. And therefore, if you have a brand that is created using one of those fonts, it's not going to look special. It's not going to look tailored for you. It's not going to look unique. It's not going to communicate your value, your uniqueness, and your difference. So I would avoid any Microsoft Office fonts. Do work with a designer, kind of you're having your branding created for you, and have them help you with the type choices that are right for your brand. And this is why it's really important to start with brand values, which is something I've already talked about in the group, and I'll reshare again later this week. So brand values are really, really important. Your brand vision, your brand aspirations, your customer vision, your company aspirations. Then we look at the values, we look at the brand personality, we look at the brand voice. We develop all of those things before we even get close to choosing a typeface. So hopefully you found that live useful. Drop me a comment and let me know what you thought. And if you've got any other questions on typefaces and fonts, then do drop them in the comment. The other thing that I do always get asked about is Canva fonts. Yeah, you can design your own logo in Canva. Again, it's not going to be unique using the Canva fonts, and it's probably not going to be trademarkable either if you do that. So it's not a design tool really for a business that's going to be scaling. Again, I would say work with someone professional, get your logos produced in a proper Adobe Illustrator format that then you can upload into Canva. And actually, if you have something that's made that's unique, you can then trademark it, which you can then use as you scale your business. Okay, so drop me a comment in there if you find any of this useful. And as I say, if you've got any other questions, come back to me, drop them in there, and I will endeavour to answer them. Thank you very much.